Now, notice the spelling of Ólafsson's name, Friðrik. That D is sort of not quite pronounced in Icelandic. I tried several times to pronounce it. I think it's Friðrik. You don't hardly say the D. It's sort of a soft rolling D with that little line through it. Let me give you the Google pronunciation.
Friðrik. Friðrik. Friðrik.
Friðrik. Friðrik Ólafsson. This was round 12, September 25th, 1959. Friðrik Ólafsson, born 26 January 1935, is still alive, approaching 90 years of age. Icelandic Grandmaster, President of FIDE from 1978 to 1982. Six-time Icelandic champion, two-time Nordic chess champion. Now, his best result in World Championship competition was the interzonal that qualified him for this event, and he finished tied 5th and 6th. But as you can see, he didn't do too well, finishing next to last in this event. So, unfortunate for him, but a strong player nonetheless. Now, usually Ólafsson played the Sicilian defense, but for whatever reason, he opts against it. Maybe he was not a big fan of facing Sozin's attack, but e5 in this instance, which means we're going to get a Rye Lopez. It's going to be knight c6, bishop b5, the Rye Lopez. Rodrigo Lopez de Segura lived in the 1500s, circa 1530 to circa 1580. Spanish chess player, author, Catholic priest, and he wrote quite the treatise on chess back in 1561, which was one of the first books about modern chess. A6 is Paul Morphy's defense. Since we're mentioning all these guys, I'll remind you that Paul Charles Morphy was born in 1837 and lived to 1884. And was from Louisiana, a lawyer. The best player ever, according to Bobby Fischer. Some dispute that. And the reason some dispute whether Morphy was best or not was because his accuracies were sometimes wanting according to modern computers. However, what the computer cannot tell you, and what most modern players don't really understand, is Morphy was so good that playing his best was boring to him. So he would occasionally throw in deliberate clunkers just for fun. He'd literally say, I'm being facetious, he didn't necessarily literally say, but he'll play a move and say, okay, what are you going to do about this? To see if his opponent could exploit the weakness of the move that he deliberately played. And then 9 times out of 10, he'd still come back from behind and beat his opponent's brains out. So you can't just judge by the numbers alone when it comes to Paul Morphy. Anyway, Paul Morphy's defense, a6. We get the Columbus variation, and I do not know why this is called the Columbus variation. I don't know of any players named Columbus, and whether this was played in the city of Columbus, maybe Columbus, Ohio, I don't know. Does anybody know? I've been begging for years for somebody to tell me how the Columbus variation got its name. I can't find it in any resources. I don't know. D6 is the modern Steinitz defense. And speaking of players, Wilhelm Steinitz was the first official world champion. He lived from 1836 to 1900. By the way, a lot of people falsely believe that Bobby Fischer was the first world champion from the United States. Well, Wilhelm Steinitz was a U.S. citizen when he won the world championship against Zukertort. Keep that in your mind. He was born in Austria, but he was an American by immigration. Naturalization, I guess they call that. All right, modern Steinitz defense right here. C3, bishop's going to come to C2 in due time. Bishop D7, pawn D4, king's knight to E7. This actually is Kozio's defense now by transposition. So let's go back a few moves. You can actually start Kozio's defense right away from the Rye Lopez by playing knight Ge7 from the get-go. So when we get this, as soon as he plays knight Ge7 now, it transposes. Since I'm giving you everybody's history, I'll mention that Carlo Cosio was the Count of Monteglio. He lived from circa 1750 to circa 1780. Italian was Cosio. Bishop B3 is Rubinstein's variation. That That's named for Akiva Rubinstein, who lived from 1880 to 1961. He was a Polish chess player, one of the tops. In fact, considered to be one of the greatest chess players not to have become world champion. H6, Queen's knight to D2, knight to G6, knight to C4. Now bishop E7, that's marked inaccurate. The bot calling for the pawn trade. I thought play B5 here first. See what we get. I get a thumbs up. The knight's going to have to move and then bring your bishop to E7, in my mind. And I get stars for those. Let's come back. Bishop E7 right away. Can't be that bad. Knight to E3. Attack the knight with D5. Force it back to B8. It's the only legal move that doesn't lose the knight. Oh, you could play here, though, I suppose. You could play knight A7 as well. What does it give you for knight A7? Gives you a thumbs up for that. All right, but Bobby with knight E3. Ólafsson with castles. More frequent here is bishop G5. And after knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, granting black an open file for his rook. But in this game, Friðrik, oh boy, I wish I could say that name.
Friðrik,
that guy. Castles is king. White castles here, and D5 is still interesting to me here as well. Same as B4. And sure, you can retreat your knight either to A7 or B8 again. Or A5. Now that there's no knight here, A5 is available. True. But Bobby castles, king H7, and that gets a big question mark. And this capture should always be under consideration. The bot was calling for A5, but I get a star for this. Hits the knight, so you have to deal with it. You either have to take with the pawn or the knight. I personally am taking with my knight, opening the diagonal for my queen, getting my knight in the center. I get a thumbs up. The bot prefers to take the classic ideal pawn center. Both moves have their merits. King H7 by Friðrik. My tongue just won't cooperate. G3 here. Bishop F6. Again, this is always going to be a move, but I thought Bishop H3 here hit the rook. What do we get? We get a star there. So very active move. And then, you know, you could either play your queen here or you can play knight B8 and knight D7, since this knight has been really not very happy where it is in its usual spot. Just put it back to bed and bring it to D7. Bishop F6 was played. Now Rook E1, question mark. H4 being called for. And I still think D5 should be played. Push him back and then play your H4 if you like. But nice set of stars for me there. Rook E1, which means this capture is always going to be recommended, even if it's not the first spot choice. It will be given a good mark one way or another. So right here, even he takes D4, but he played King H8, and there it is, as expected. And true, I'm going to capture back with my pawn or my knight, but the pawn, since the last time we tried the knight, the bot said, just get the ideal pawn center. King H8. Did I mention that D5 is my favorite move here? A3. The bot prefers bishop C2. I would guarantee that D5 is going to get a good mark. Gets a star. And we're always going to get, you know, we can always play this later. A3 from Fischer, Queen E8, and I know that might seem repetitious, but this tension in the center, the bot's going to want to resolve that on virtually every move. The bot's going to want this kind of a continuation. And okay, if knight A5 here, then bishop D2 can be played, hitting the knight and inviting a capture, and then we capture that with our queen, hitting the pawn, and compelling him to defend that pawn one way or another. Say Rook B8, for example. Instead, Queen E8. Now H4, Bishop D8 is played. Knight F5, not liked. So the bot calling for A4 here. Of course, D5 has got to be on the books. Obviously, we can always play this. And I was just about to say Bishop C2 is also a very thematic move. And ironically, when I play Bishop C2, it says D5 is the best. And when I play D5, it says Bishop C2 is the best. I had both in my notes, and the bot is going to yell at me no matter what I play because it's fickle bot and it's mean bot. Brother. You can't please it. You play this one and it says you should have played that one. And so I say, okay, I'll go with you, fickle bot. He says, no, psych, gotcha. You should have played that other move. You moron. Bobby didn't play either of those moves. He played knight to F5. Bobby figures if the bot's going to yell at me anyway, I might as well do what I want to do. King's knight to e7 puts the question to this knight. Pawn takes pawn at last, resolving this tension. Pawn takes pawn. Right now, the bot calling for knight takes pawn, and I'm wondering why not just play knight takes knight here? Is that not going to work? And then after e takes, then play... Oh, that's inaccurate. That is apparently inaccurate. Okay. D takes e5 was the move, and queen c2 here. Big red X. Wow. Capture that. That's beautiful. I actually had that in my mind at another point. Knight takes h6. But here I was actually thinking first g4. That gives me a check mark. But here the knight takes pawn is exquisite. First of all, we're threatening to take that pawn next, and so he's compelled to take our knight. But now, notice, bishop takes pawn, hits the rook. And if he tries to save the rook, knight g5 comes into play. In fact, it says that's a mistake to try to save your rook, because knight g5 comes in for the super attack on the f-man, and this queen's path is open, and it is not looking good. I may be able to just take that. There are so many ways to win. You're bound to like one of them. So that is a very nice move by the bot. I did have that. I remember looking at a move like that at some point in this game. I thought I did, and perhaps it was later in the game. I don't remember. Anyway, queen c2 was played. I think it was on the next move that I thought knight takes h6. So here bishop e6. Oh no, I remember. It was here when the pawn moves to f6 instead of the bishop move. The bot's calling for f6, but now, of course, we can still play this move. Oh no, I guess I can't. I guess I can't. I got duped. That's actually where I saw it. But my point is, black's going to lose the exchange here. This is why I'm making the sacrifice, is I've got black's rook in a crisscross. He can't save the rook at all now. He's got to give up his rook for one of the two bishops. Now, he can give it up for the light squared bishop, or he can leave it there and give it up for the dark squared bishop, but he's got to give up his rook for a bishop. So that's why I liked getting that knight for the two pawns and then getting the rook for the bishop. Well, queen c2 was played. Now bishop e6. Bishop takes the bishop. That's marked inaccurate. Instead, it likes king to g2 here. That's, I guess, to defend this knight because of this piece relationship, because certainly this pawn is going to capture on e6 and open the file. So that's very subtle. Very subtle move, king g2. Knight e3 should be okay. I get a thumbs up. Well, bishop e6, bishop takes e6, pawn takes the bishop, and sure enough, we get this discovered attack by the rook. So knight takes the knight, bishop takes the knight, queen e2 defends the f3 knight. So had he played king g2, then that knight would already be defended. Queen g6, this is an interesting pin here. The threat of bishop takes the pawn is an important one. Even though this knight is here, that can become important. B4, now rook f6. And yeah, this is a good example of why this pin is important. King g8, the idea here is to support the rook in coming to the f7 square, which would then be followed by the queen's rook to f8, doubling on the open file. And the point is now you have a battery against the knight, only defended by the queen, which is insufficient, but the knight can't move to safety because of this pin. Well, if it moves to safety, he's going to lose this pawn. That's my point. Okay, let's just do nothing here for a second. On rook f7, my point is here. Let's say I see this coming, so I move my knight. Well, bishop takes the pawn. It doesn't like that. Maybe I'm full of balog now. Okay, let's go back. I see it. The knight can come to g4 and then take the rook if the king is still on h8 because it comes with check. So let me illustrate that instead. So let's say here he plays rook f7. Oops, instead of king g8. Let's say he plays rook f7. This is just for instance. I can play h5 hitting the queen. That decoys the queen in line with my queen. Okay, it doesn't because he doesn't have to play this. I guess I'm full of baloney. My point was that knight, okay, at least I got a double exclam. My point is that this attack on the queen and the attack on the rook comes with check. So after queen takes the queen, knight takes the rook is check. And then after after king g8, then we can actually desperado and pick up another pawn, and only then do we have to worry about regaining the queen. That was my whole point. So by playing king g8, that whole line is kiboshed. All right, rook f6 was played here. Knight h2. He doubles his rooks on the f file. Rook a f8. Now h5 is played, hitting the queen. Queen e8. Bishop e3. Bishop d6. Now pawn a4. That gets a question mark. I mean, other than slightly weakening the b-man, I'm not sure why that gets a question mark. Perhaps getting your queen's rook on the open file would be advisable here. Let's see. I get a check mark. a4 was played. Knight b8, rook ec1, queen c6, pawn f3 defends, queen back to e8, pawn g4, now knight back to c6, should have come to d7, pawn b5, knight a5, and obviously he wants to fork these rooks, so rook d1. So obviously you don't want to just take this pawn. Yeah, it's a big red X. Well, I guess he has to take, though, because you don't want to give him... Yeah, if you play here, I've got here. You have to take. Yep, and then I'll stop the fork. Okay, good. Rook d1 was played. Knight b3 is played anyway. Rook a b1. Knight c5. Now pawn a5. And, okay, I'm not... It gets a star. I guess he's just pushing forward, isn't he? Knight a4 was played here. Rook d c1 defends. Bishop c5. Bishop takes the bishop. Now is the time to play pawn takes pawn, I think. And on pawn takes pawn, get out of this pin. King h1, star. Bishop took bishop in this game. Knight takes the bishop. Queen e3 hits the knight. Queen e7 defends. Rook d1 getting back on the open file. Rook f4 gets inaccurate. Actually thought it might be prudent to get the king off the back rank here, since white's own pieces are making him weak on the white squares. Play king h7. I get a thumbs up. Again, fickle bot. When I say king h7 is my best move, get the king off the back rank, the bot says, no, you should play rook f4. But when the grandmaster played rook f4, the bot says, no, you should have retreated your rook. Fickle bot is at it again. And that's why I say, don't sweat the yellows. Don't worry about these inaccuracies. The bot can't even agree with himself or itself. Rook b4 here. Rook a8. By the way, this is move 39 coming up, so the fact that you're going to see more inaccuracies is probably due to time pressure. Rook db1. King h7 now. King h1. And boy, the eval bar plummeted there. Pawn takes pawn was the necessary move. And after rook takes pawn, rook b5 defending and super attacking. By the way, you can defend with rook c6, I suppose. Coming back, king h1 was played on move 40. Queen d6, big red X, better as rook d8. Get on that open file, and then, of course, you're likely to see the pawn trade there. Queen d6. Now time control is satisfied. Rook from b4 to b2. Pawn takes the pawn. Now rook takes the pawn. The bot calling that inaccurate, calling for rook g2. I prefer rook d2, hitting the queen. And then this pawn can be captured with the other rook, which means that queen will be relegated to the c6 square, where it has to babysit. Wow, 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 wow. Bobby played rook takes the pawn, super attacking the knight, and the knight retreats to d7. Knight d3 is quite interesting. Might look vulnerable because can't you pin the knight to the queen? No, you can't. Remember, if you're not careful, a pin can be turned into a discovered attack, and that's what would happen here. Check, and that rook is undefended. So, after queen takes knight, bye-bye rookie, I eat you like a cookie. With check, no less. Knight d7 was played in this game. Rook takes the b-man here. Right, play queen g1 first, I guess, to relieve this rook of the defensive responsibilities of the first rank, or maybe to push here. What's the reason for queen g1? Maybe to push on the g file. g5 is coming, but can't he just play g5 first? No, he cannot. That's a mistake. Okay. Anyway, rook takes the b-man was played here, and rook takes He's the A-man. Rook B7 to B2. Queen E7. Rook G1 here. Queen G5 blockading. C4. Rook B7 now. I think Rook B7 can be answered by Rook C5 and defend. Get a star. C4 from Fischer. Now Rook C5 is played, and the bot prefers Rook A8. Doesn't matter. Either way, the Rook is getting off of A5 and out of harm's way from Queen D2. Bobby, actually, Queen C3 does the same thing, and that's what Bobby plays. Queen C3, Rook F8, Rook D1, hits the knight, Rook F7 defends, Rook B5 puts the question to its counterpart. It's ignored because it's defended, so Queen F4. Now note you don't want to trade rooks here, and that allows the pawn to capture. Okay, he could play Knight B6, blockading and oh, not right. Because of Queen B3, he'd have to play Rook E7, wouldn't he? Okay, I'm not having too much success with the bot tonight. I did get one double exclam, but I had to play some inaccuracies to get it. Queen F4 was played here. Now King G2 helps to defend. Do not play Rook takes the knight. That would be horrific. On Rook takes the knight, the idea is removing the defender, right? And if you take my rook, I get a rook and a knight for a rook. Except he doesn't have to take the rook. He can take this rook. And then after Rook takes rook, then we get Rook B1 check. That buys a tempo. And after king here, then the queen can capture there. And that puts black up the exchange, even though I can pick up one pawn here. But black is much better. After queen to D7, black is in control. So avoid that non-tactic tactic. King G2. Rook C6 here. C5. Rook A6. C6 hits the knight. Rook A2 check. Knight C5 called for. Could also play Knight B6. No, I changed its mind. On Knight B6, I'll play Queen D2 and see if you'll trade queens. You don't have to. You can play Queen F6. Oh, or defend your queen. Right back. Rook A2 check was played. Now Rook B2 interposes. Rook takes the rook. Queen takes the rook. Here Knight F6 is played. Queen B3 hitting the pawn. Rook E7 defends. Now Rook D8. Bot calling for Queen A3. I was actually tempted to get my knight back into the game. Let's see what Knight F1 gets. A check mark. Rook D8 was Bobby's choice. Queen G5. King H3 keeps the queen from H4. G6. Now Queen B4 hits the rook. Yeah, that's quite a threat there. We're looking at a checkmate threat. That's checkmate. So Rook G7. And now Queen F8 is not going to work because pawn takes pawn gives the king an escape square, right? So this would be a blunder. Yeah, it's marked double question mark. And the point is I can give my king an escape square. So instead, Bobby played pawn takes the pawn himself with check. King takes the pawn. Queen D2 puts the question to the queen. That question is answered with a trade. And we're dead equal going into a rook knight versus rook knight endgame. Seems like this should be a draw, but it didn't end in a draw. Let's see where Ólafsson went awry. He played Knight G8, Rook D7. Obviously, you can't trade because that gives a unstoppable pass pawn. So Knight F6, Rook D3, Knight G8, a quick repetition here, Rook C3, Knight E7, Knight F1 now, Rook G8, Knight G3, King G5, Knight H5. This comes with the idea of Rook C5, Rook D8, not liked by the bot. The bot calling for King G6. I would think Knight G6 should work as well, check mark. But the eval bar doesn't really nudge too far in white's direction here, just barely. Rook C5 though, as surmised, and now Knight G6. But now I actually prefer Rook D6. The bot's still calling for King G6, but I like Rook D6 here. I get a thumbs up. Knight G6 was played, but King G3 here, and now F4 is a winning move because this is pinned. That's checkmate. Oh, the knight can take, but you'd have to give up your knight. So for that reason, Rook D3 pins the pawn to the king. Knight G7, King F6, Knight E8 check, King E7, Knight takes pawn, King D6. Now we get Knight A6 here. Knight E7. Rook A3 called for by the bot. Interesting, yeah. I'd push my pawn, to be honest. If you push the pawn, that's going to force him to defend the promotion square right there. And yeah, you can win, sort of. You just trade that. But you should still be winning, shouldn't you? That's going to fall. That'll be a pass pawn. White should win. Knight e7 was played by Friðrik. That guy. c7 was played anyway. Knight c8 blockades. You could try rook a3 first here again. Knight c8, rook c1, rook d2, rook h1, rook a2, hitting the knight. Oh, that is not liked by the eval bar. It gets a check mark, but look at the eval bar. If the eval bar goes that far, that deserves something other than a check mark. I'm putting the blunder sign there. How can it be a good move when the eval bar lunges up to 6 points in white's favor? Just cannot be. I mean, rook b2 should be better. I get a star for rook b2. And now on rook d1 check, king c6, then we get rook c1 check, king d6, right? Just go back and forth. But on rook a2, rook d1, and here's the point, is king c6 is no longer possible because that results in a fork. If you're wondering what the big difference is between rook a2 and rook b2, if now king c6, it's a Forkosaurus Rex, baby, and bye-bye rookie, I'll eat you like a cookie. So compare that to this move, and now king c6 can be played. Okay. But rook a2, rook d1 check, therefore king e7 had to be played. And knight b4 hits the rook anyway, and Ólafsson resigned here. Now, keep in mind, when we went into the endgame, the eval bar was dead equal, but he has nothing. The point is, rook d8 is coming, knight c6 is coming, one of these moves is coming. Okay, let's say you try to defend on the back rank with rook a8. I'm still playing rook d8, and you don't really have a move. You can't play your knight and say trade because you're giving up the promotion. So what can you play? You can only move your king. It's the only piece you can move. Everything else gets captured. So king f6, king f7, doesn't matter. My knight's coming here first. It's going to interfere with your rook. I'm going to pick up your knight. I'm going to win this game. So he's got to move back and forth and knight to here. And that's that. Okay. Wow. What a turnaround. 93.1 accuracy for Bobby Fischer with a 2750 single game rating. He surely outplayed him in the end game. That's what you call end game precision. If we go back to when our opponent played here, we've got a dead equal eval bar. But of course, the biggest blunder was the rook a2.